Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. Today I am back again with another video. The subject of today's video is going to be the second installment in a series I am doing now, which is basically just about my favorite seasons in NBA history. If you weren't familiar with this and that I started this series, you can go back and watch the first one also on my channel. I just want to do this series because it's something that I've been interested in. I've studied the history of the NBA quite a bit, and I've noticed there are certain seasons where the NBA is just really interesting, and then again, there are certain seasons where the NBA is a little less interesting. My example of this would be sort of like last year is a year where I would argue the NBA wasn't all that interesting. You had the Warriors, who basically everybody knew would get to the finals, and you had the Cavaliers, which there was some intrigue there with whether or not they'd still be able to get back with LeBron and basically a poor cast. But overall, I feel like people really knew it was the Warriors championship for sure. I feel like the same with the year before that into the 2017 finals with Durant going to the Warriors. People really thought for sure that he'd be going there. But I've noticed in some other seasons, it's really interesting and there's really a sense of like mystery around who might get to the finals. That's really what I like in a season. I like a season where there's a fair amount of parity and you can go into the playoffs thinking like five to six teams could potentially get to the finals or win it. That being said, in the first video, I talked about a season which I thought was interesting, and so today I'm going to be talking about a different season in which there were some interesting storylines going on and good competition in the playoffs and such. So today's season will be the 03 to 04 season, which obviously is about 15 years ago as of this season. Interesting storylines to start the season were, of course, the rookie class, which featured LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, one of the most talented rookie classes of all time. You had Dwayne Wade finding playoff success in Miami in his first season, along with Carmelo Anthony making the playoffs in his first season. LeBron and Bosh didn't make the playoffs, but their teams did improve a bit. Other interesting storylines this year were that Vince Carter was getting super upset in Toronto and just very upset with the team and with management and how the team was being run. And so there was a pretty big trade mid-season that sent him to New Jersey, where he played really well. And he averaged, I think, around 28 points per game when he was on New Jersey that first season. And so then you had a new sort of big three or big four in New Jersey with Jason Kidd, Vince Carter, Richard Jefferson, and Kenyon Martin, which was his last year before he left for Denver. So they were a team that people were looking at saying, man, they could be a really good team in the conference and potentially challenge to go to the finals for a third straight time. Beyond that, you had Detroit, which traded for Rasheed Wallace mid-season at the trade deadline to improve their starting lineup. They had come off a trip to the Eastern Conference Finals and were considered a team on the rise, and so they were considered a threat to go far in the playoffs. You also had Indiana continuing their success of the late 90s to early 2000s. They actually had the best record in the NBA this season at 61-21. Reggie Miller was still a contributing factor. You also had Ron Artest on the team, along with I believe Al Harrington was on there, and a few other guys, but those were some of their main guys. I think Jermaine O'Neal was on the team at the time. He was one of their best players and an all-star. But the East is the less interesting side, I'd say, of this equation. The West was very interesting to me. You had the Timberwolves, who had the best record in the conference, and so they were perennially a team that lost in the first round for like 7 straight seasons. But this was the year where they really brought it all together. They had acquired Sam Cassell and Latrell Sprewell, guys who were Sam Cassell was an all-star that season, and Sprewell had been a previous all-star. So he finally had some decent talent around Garnett, and they won 58 games and led the conference. Then you had the Lakers, who formed their big super team with Karl Malone, Gary Payton, Shaq, and Kobe. Along with that, you had the Spurs, who were in between their 2 titles in 03 and 05, so they were obviously a threat with 57 wins. Then you still had Sacramento as a contender. They won 55 games this year. They still had Chris Webber. I'd say this is basically the end of his prime was this season. You also still had Peja Stojakovic in the middle of his prime. Still had Mike Bibby, Vladi Divac, Doug Christie. So you still had that whole gang together who won 61 games in 2002. And then you had, as the fifth seed, Dallas, who is still quite a contender. From their run the previous season to the conference finals. They had added Antoine Jameson as their sixth man, and he won sixth man of the year. And I actually have a video discussing this team and why they were a big disappointment, but they were a pretty loaded team. I believe they also had Antoine Walker on the team at this time, and then they had obviously Dirk and Nash and Sean Bradley and a few other guys. But yeah, they were a really talented team at this point, and so you really had a loaded West, and I would say basically looking at it, you had about 8 teams who could conceivably go to the finals or win the title. In the East, it was Indiana, New Jersey, and Detroit, and then in the West, it was Minnesota because they led the conference, the Lakers, the Spurs, the Kings, and the Mavericks. I'd say it was basically those 8 teams, and as I say, you had a few interesting storylines, but I think that parity makes for good playoffs in that um, in the second round, the conference finals and the finals, that combined is 7 different series going on. You had 6 of those 7 series go 6 games or longer, so 6 or 7 games. In my opinion, if you have a series that goes either to 6 or 7 games, that qualifies as a, a decently competitive series where there was a good back and forth between the teams. And so that being said, every matchup in the second round and conference finals went to at least 6 games or 7. And then in the finals, it only went to 5. But the rounds leading up to that were pretty competitive. So I thought that makes up for that a little bit. So in the East, you had Indiana beating Miami in 6 games in the second round, and then Detroit beating the reigning Eastern Conference champs and newly minted Big Four in New Jersey. The Pistons beat them in 7 games, and then in the Eastern Conference Finals, you had Detroit upset Indiana, and yes, I said upset because Detroit only won 54 games that year compared to Indiana's 61. But Detroit had acquired Rashid, and then they had an improved defense with Ben Wallace coming into his own even more, and Tayshaun Prince becoming more of a contributing factor. So they beat Indiana in 6 games to get to the finals. So that was again a pretty decent series. Then in the West, in the second round, you had Minnesota beat Sacramento in 7 games. And in the other side of the second round, you had the Lakers beating the Spurs in 6 games. Western Conference Finals, you had the Lakers beating the Timberwolves in 6 games. And then in the finals, of course, Detroit pulls off a huge upset and beats the Lakers in 5 games. That's another reason why I like this season is that you had Detroit beating Los Angeles, who was considered to be a juggernaut, the first super team, a lot of people were calling them, um, with the additions of Peyton and Malone. There are probably super teams that were formed before that, and it really depends on your opinion of a super team. But this team really was seen as overpowering, and uh, the fact that they basically, although they were in 6 game series with the Lakers and Minnesota, or excuse me, with the Spurs and Minnesota, they still were in relative control of those series. But it just was so interesting seeing Detroit totally manhandle them in the finals. And Chauncey Billups talks a lot about what their strategy was to take them down. And basically, it was to let Shaq get as many looks and touches as he wants and just to constantly trap Kobe Bryant once he got across half court handling the ball and double team him right at the half court so that he would have to pass it out immediately. But then, as I say, their plan was to then let Shaq get as many points as he wants. But Chauncey then said that if Kobe wasn't getting many points in the first half, he'd start rushing things and forcing shots in the second half, and that's really when they were going to make their moves and get ahead in the ball game, which is basically what happened in the series. Kobe got nervous and a little antsy when he wasn't scoring much in the first half, so then he was forcing things in the second half, and they weren't getting good possessions, and they lost the series. But it was one of the bigger upsets in finals history, I would have to say. So that was very interesting. Overall, I just like it when you have a season where you have multiple teams competing and it's not just like one or two teams who could conceivably win the title. Again, it was also cool to see the Timberwolves for once not be just a terrible uh, 42-40 team that loses in the first round. They were quite a surprise. Um, there's not really a modern day equivalent I could think of. Maybe if somebody like if the Nuggets finished first place in the West this season, which they currently are sitting at, it would sort of be like the Timberwolves winning the conference back then would be like the Nuggets winning it now. Like people expected them to be a playoff team, but not to be the 1 seed or even the 2 seed. Um, that being said, I just found that all really interesting. And then obviously there's a lot of really good rookies that enter the league that just improved the talent pool of the players involved. And so all those factors combined made this a season that I really found interesting and enjoyed to go back and look at and find statistics on and read about and watch some highlights from and some games from it that time. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you leave comments below if you have an opinion or you want to share your favorite season with me. That'd be awesome. I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.